Kia ora and welcome to the Hockey New Zealand Exploring Coaching podcast. These podcasts are an exciting opportunity for our local coaches to hear from experienced hockey people about all things coaching. Our intention is that you'll pick up what you like and give it a try for yourself, hopefully fueling your own development in our great game. Today we're going to be talking about game day process and preparation, exploring the ins and outs of what actually goes on a game day for coaches. That is pre-match, during the match and post-match. To find more information about coaching in our podcast, head over to the Hockey New Zealand website and click on the Get Involved in Coaching tab. Follow the links from there and you'll have everything you need. With that said, settle in and enjoy the podcast. Hello, good morning everyone. My name's Jamie Carroll. I work for Bay Plenty Hockey as the Coaching and Development Manager. We're here today to have a bit of a catch up with a couple of performance coaches that have got plenty of international experience. Today we're going to be looking at game day process and preparation, as a lot of us will be getting ready to head back out onto the turf and get stuck into some hockey. We thought we'd tap into some of the great hockey minds that are currently residing in New Zealand. First of all, we have Jason Butcher. A lot of you may know him. He's got experience in New Zealand and Australia at international level and done a lot of performance directing. Years and years of experience and a wealth of knowledge. So welcome, Jason. Butch to his mate, so we'll refer to him as Butch.
Absolutely.
Then on the other screen, you'll see a guy with very nice hair from the Netherlands. His name is Mark Borgers. Hopefully, I got that right. Luckily enough, I've spent a fair bit of time with Mark over the last 2 years, and he's mentored me in my own coach development, and I've gained a lot of great information and advice from him. So he's now a performance coach for New Zealand Hockey, which is a great position for him. As you can see, he's wearing the nice Lotto kit there. So we'll get underway and we'll start having a bit of a chat around game day process. It's a pretty massive part of the game, and as for a coach, it's probably our time to shine. So I'll open it up to both of you guys. So first of all, what is it and why is it so important?
Yeah, good question. For me, it is all about getting your players in the right mood for a game, and obviously there are multiple ways in doing so, and it depends on the team and the individuals that you're coaching. Not sure how you are seeing that, Jason.
Yeah, I think it's a massive question because the thing that flicks through my mind straight away is like, what are the parameters? Is it what time do your players get to the ground? What are they doing during that time? Do we have a game brief? Are they in the change room? What does the game brief look like? How do we warm up? What do we do during the game? How does the coach behave? Do we do a review afterwards? So recovery. So it's a massive sort of piece of work that I think about with what the game day processes look like. I think the most visible thing obviously is what the coach is doing when the game's going. So when we're playing. And that's probably maybe an easy place to start. But yeah, I think it's massive. I think there's so much in that we could talk about around what happens in that maybe 2-3 hour block of what you do on game day for sure.
Personally, I do like to work with a structure, like a time structure, a time schedule, but you need to be flexible to deviate from that structure as well. Being flexible on a game day is I experienced there's something that's quite important. It's things could happen that you haven't sort of prepared for. And usually, it depends on the travel time and all that stuff. But I would say you need sort of 1 hour and 15 minutes, to prepare for a game, and to be at the venue where you need to play that game.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's the whole, the culture of your teams and trying to have teams that can adapt and problem solve and deal with things that change. We've all heard the stories about teams that get stuck in the traffic at Olympics and so forth. I think it's a really interesting space though about when you turn up and how you prepare immediately before games. Two teams that I've coached sort of come to mind. One was thundersticks in the AHL when we played in Darwin, and it was really hot. And we were doing pre-cooling stuff at the hotel in like plunge pools and other things around cooling, ice, etc. And we were turning up to the game about 10 minutes before it started and doing a 6-minute warm-up. And we practiced all of that, of course, trained in rope, garbage bags and so forth before we got to Darwin. But we didn't have a hiccup with that, maybe because we prepared that way. But it's interesting when you can go to that extreme, and then you start to question, okay, what is getting there early? What is your preparation like? So that was a really interesting exercise. We played in the grand final that year in a team that many thought weren't in that space. So it certainly didn't hurt what we're doing. And on the flip side, I coached the 21s team, the Northern Territory boys, who were used to all the heat. And we were in Canberra when there was basically ice on the pitch at 9 o'clock in the morning. And we did the opposite. We had the boys in hot pools, and we sat in the bus outside the venue with the heaters cranking, 2 layers of clothes. And we pretty much just walked out and played. And they played it 2 lost grand finals. They played in the grand final that year as well. But yeah, it's interesting what we lock into on what preparation should be, or the lead in preparation. And yeah, I guess evidence for me in a couple of different scenarios where maybe there's still questions to ask.
That's definitely a flexible approach there, Butch. So 2 very extreme situations, which is quite cool for you to share those things. So that's awesome. So you kind of setting up a structure for your game day to occur as a coach, and you've got all those preparations in place. How do you go about setting that up for your players and getting them to buy into that?
With the crazy stuff, or just in general?
Just in general, I think if you want to set a culture for a team or a set of expectations, it's important to set that up. And I just wondered how you might do that.
Yeah, well, for me anyway, I think it's with anything you do right at the start, you've got to sort of map out your journey, and whether it's to get to a championship or a grand final, or your weekly stuff, you've got to get buy-in. So it's about including everybody in what that story is going to look like and how you're going to get there, and then actually having them as part of implementing that as you go along. So as always, buy-in is really important, but you've got to sell a vision, and you've got to include people in building that vision before you get going. Otherwise, it's really difficult. And then, of course, it's the processes about how you prepare for that. How do you practice it? How do you make sure, that if you're in Canberra and you're sitting in the bus with heaters and you're not doing your normal warm-up, that's just, we know it's going to work, and that's what we're ready for, and there's no stress about it,
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely about buy-in. What is interesting, though, is that there could be different sort of visions to that, because are you working with a leadership group or just with a captain and a vice captain who you're going to consult as a coach, or are you actually sort of designating different responsibilities to all of your players? And personally, I like to do the last one. So all of my players have some sort of responsibility to create that buy-in, but they're not responsible for everything. So I would definitely ask 2 or 3 players to be responsible for a day game schedule or program, and they need to make sure that they consult with the rest of the group. They present that to me as a coach, and then some discussion, some healthy discussion might occur, and then you get to something. But it shouldn't be, this is my opinion as a coach, and you're just gonna follow me, because then you need to work in the army, I believe.
Yeah, 100%, mate. And I think there's lots of different ways that you can do that. But I really agree that you want to be inclusive with your whole group, and not just have 2 or 3 people, because that sort of makes it no different than the coach being a dictator, So the challenge is, how do you implement that? What are the processes of collaboration and inclusion, and actually getting to productive sort of points in terms of how you do things, because that it can be quite messy. You don't want a free-for-all. So I think there's a real art to that. But I think for me anyway, the journey of coaching for decades is that's if you don't get that right, or you don't at least really try hard at including everybody and empowering people and giving them ownership of all those different layers, you're never going to have the sort of team that you need that can, again, adapt and problem solve and also really be invested from an ownership perspective that it's theirs. It's not just a coach telling them what to do.
Very nice example. I worked with a player, actually. I won't, say her name. She's currently in the Dutch national squad, but I coached her in her youth when she was 16, 17. And she absolutely hated to do the warm-up. And we all have this idea of doing a team warm-up, and everyone needs to, run at the same pace in the same line and do the same things, as we are robots. And she's this amazing creative hockey player, and she just hated that. So, when we started doing that, I could see that she started to behave well in a way that, she was just testing the group and testing me as a coach. And if you get angry and if you just wanted to keep in line, then I think you actually pushed the wrong button with the player. So I just sat down with her and, talked with her about what she needed before a game. And then we just shared that story with the group. And then, she just sometimes when the group had their warm-ups, she just sit down in the dugout, doing nothing, just getting her focus in her own way. And everyone accepted that. And actually that's something that you want to sort of crave for as a coach, I would say.
Yeah, it's a great story, mate. I think, and it probably gets into a topic of, what you do with your physical warm-up and technical warm-up and those sort of things. And I think historically, most of us, as we become, developing coaches, think that control and this regimented sort of war machine where it looks like we've got a marching band sort of working together. It's like, well, I'm on top of this as a coach and everybody's organised and we're going to go well. And then you start to unpack what that actual preparation is about. And it's about all of these individual forms of life getting prepared on their terms in a way that works for them. But then also you still need the process of creating synergy and getting everybody connected. So there's no one answer for any of that, is there? But and there's also it's not simple, because you've got to herd those 16 individuals so that they are connected and in synergy, ready to play. And there's emotions and all sorts of stuff attached to that, not just physical. But at the same time, we've got all these unique individuals that, some are better if they're just sitting in the dugout and not engaging, and others will have crazy, meticulous things that they feel they need to do. And the art and the challenge is, how do you put all that together so we're ready to go as one form of life, but we're also nurturing and getting all those individual, or giving all those individual forms of life the preparation they need.
This does stress out the importance of having a very open environment where people, at least sort of feel confident enough to share what they feel they need, instead of just following the herd or the one with the strongest opinion or the biggest mouth. An open environment where you discuss those things in the end should lead to whatever answer you're looking for as a coach.
Yeah, so it gets back to that process you were talking about before, and how you design and craft that. It's an interesting space. And of course, then as a coach, you can't get lost in the fact that sometimes players don't know, and sometimes, we all can make the wrong choices for ourselves. If you I think of senior players who basically just don't want to warm up because they're lazy, and that they need to do something, and they give you a story around, no, I'm better when I sit and I'm quiet, and you're like, not fully sold on this. So you still got to challenge and ask questions and make sure that everybody gets to the right place within that as well.
I've had a lot of experience, obviously, playing in different teams and having some weird teammates that do some pretty funky things, which is quite cool. But I suppose from a coaching perspective, you're really there to be the leader and ensure that your outcome of being prepared and ready to play is being reached. So kind of working with players on an individual basis to make sure that they're going to be involved and buying into that is important. One example that I just recently saw down in the FIH Pro League down in Christchurch was the Spanish men, their warm-up. When you compare it to the New Zealand men's warm-up was very relaxed. There was quite a lot of laughing, just really kind of a fluid kind of warm-up, and the Kiwi boys looked a little bit more regimented in their approach. So it kind of comes down to the culture of the team and obviously in that case probably the nationality. So that's really interesting to kind of talk about. All right, so moving on, what have you guys found successful on game day, and maybe some of the things that haven't been so successful for you through your experience?
Well, for me, what hasn't been successful is just being me, because I have my preferences. And for example, in the briefing before the game, I like to work with motivational stories or videos, and that definitely appeals to a part of my group. But there's also a part of my group that wants something else. And it took me a while to figure it out, that, what I like is not what everyone like. What I've learned is that, having some sort of diverse approach to learning or what people like on a game day is quite important. And you figure it out along the way. But I would definitely recommend that some players just need an individual approach, and some players just want to recapture some of the tactics or strategy towards the game. Other players do like to have an inspirational video or a story that is actually not about the game itself, more a metaphor to the game. That's my biggest takeaway as a coach, but that's sort of evolved over years. It's not just a one-day learning.
Yeah, I think the game brief thing's a really interesting space. Could be a podcast on its own, like probably lots of these themes. But I've coached teams recently where we don't have a game brief when we get to the ground, where we'll design what we do during the week to reinforce how we want to play and what's coming up on the weekend. And the game brief will be sent out in a WhatsApp group on a Thursday, and then there'll be subgroup and individual conversations until you get to the weekend. And when we get to the ground, it's all about just mentally preparing and going through the preparation. And not all of that was successful, but I think with game briefs that sometimes we get into a trap where we put the lineup on a whiteboard and we have some dot points. Go through any change room in the country, communication, work hard, and it just becomes white noise. And, it's too vague. And I'm sure lots of people get benefit out of that approach and do it more specific to their group. But I'm not convinced that we need to have a game brief on the day. And I'm not convinced what we get out of it or what we retain or what it means, leading into the game. But certainly that fits in with what you're saying, Mark, around, you're prescribing it to your group's needs and what they feel they need as well. But also maybe for the coaches listening in, I think there's so many things that you can experiment with and explore and not lock in on regurgitating what you had when you were a player or what you see others do. I think there's lots of things that we do that maybe we don't need to, and lots of things that we do that there are opportunities to explore better ways, whether it's for your group or just in general.
Yep, I agree. What I also like to share, and it's funny in a way, I did share new information on game days, things that I thought last minute were very important after analyzing videos. And you're really happy with your briefing, you're like, yeah, I nailed it. This is so true. And if we do it, then we're going to beat them for sure. And then I hear myself saying in the first quarter or in halftime, when we reflect on the first bit of hockey, I'm just hearing myself saying like, oh, we didn't do this and we didn't do this. And we actually discussed it. Well, we didn't discuss it. It was just me telling them. And they just heard it for the first time, and they needed to A, understand it, and B, being able to actually transfer it into their game play directly. That's just something that absolutely doesn't work. Maybe one out of your group will be able to transfer it, but new information on a game day, just don't go there. It's doesn't really work. No.
Yeah, 100%, mate. And we all make that mistake. And sometimes in big games early on in our career. I think with communication, the thing we got to understand is that it's not just me or you talking, and then you go, like you said, oh, God, I'm speaking well today. Nailed that. Yeah. Communication is actually how it's received, and then how they interpret it. So it's quite a complex sort of thing, that interaction between the two people. And certainly if you do it at the last minute, you're on a hiding to nothing. So it's got to be, right through the thread of how you always operate. But I think the other thing for me is, like, I like to try and stress test communication along the way. So common themes, consistent messages, right through, attack it at different angles through your whole week and your weekend. But you've got to find ways to find out what the group and individual are actually taking from what you've given them. Otherwise, you just don't know. And you spend a year or sometimes, whatever period thinking, we're nailing this, we're moving along. And in actual fact, athletes maybe don't even understand some of the words that you're using, or they might not be on page, or they might not have a clue with this one concept that you've been really digging in on, what it actually even means. So whether it's just stress testing on the performance and going, yep, they get it, they're working through that in how we play and developing how we play, or actually getting a grasp on that really quickly on whether they understand it and how they're interpreting it.
That's why it's actually good to involve them. So we've done this video, we've discussed this during a briefing. Could you just capture it as a player? Could you summarize what we have been discussing over the past week or past few days? That's for me a good way to do that, to check it at least.
Yeah, and now, we found in this 6-week sort of crazy period of our lives that the technology can help us be more efficient as well. And there's lots of opportunities within the things we've been exposed to over the last 6 weeks. One of the years I coached the Thunder Six in the Australian Hockey League, we talked about being more efficient with our training and basically not doing things that were a waste of time and really getting to prioritising our time on consistently doing the stuff that mattered. And what we did for a block of period was we had a 3 or 4 question monkey survey that got sent out straight after every training session. And that just allowed us to see whether what we were doing was working, whether it's a training effect or whether we were progressing with the concepts, whether we were doing the right things, and also whether there's things that they thought we could add to the, whether it's the small games we were playing or whatever to make it better. And that was a really cool experience because every now and then you get some diamonds around how we could make things better with training or different drills or so forth. But it also allowed us to track in real time whether our trainings were hitting the mark from an athlete perspective. So that was a really interesting thing and maybe a thing that we're now exposed to about, okay, how can we use all this technology so we're not having another hour meeting after training, but we're including the athletes in these processes and we're really gleaning out of them where we're at with what's going on. Yeah.
I have to be honest, though, that, I also had to learn it was a little bit about me during game days. We talk about athletes and doing everything to make sure that they perform well. But it's not only, the past few years that I figured out how I can be at my best. And I think that's important, too, because you can be an absolute shambles when you're a coach. Not saying that, you decide whether the team wins or loses, but you need to make sure that your own focus is good too, and that's something that works differently for each individual, I would say.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting one. Like I can basically be upfront and honest. In my early days, whether it was with the Hockey Roos or and like real high performance stuff, I was really bad at getting to game days or during tournaments, just being really tired and trying to do everything and just smashing out every moment you could try and do something or be more prepared or watch something or talk to another athlete. And it probably takes a couple of crashes for the strong-minded of us to really go, okay, I need to look after myself better because I'm not making perfect decisions or the best decisions I can. Maybe my emotions aren't managed as well as they should be. And all these different things because I'm tired and not really looking after myself, they're affecting my lens on what's going on and how I approach it and how I influence the group with how I'm carrying myself. So I think how you look after yourself, probably as we get older, mate, we're forced to do that anyway, because we can't just absorb it with our youthful athleticism, But yeah, the coach has a massive impact on the group just in how they carry themselves. And obviously they've got to make decisions as well and sometimes under pressure quickly. So you can't do that at your ultimum unless, you're hydrated, you've slept well, you're eating well. It's just not possible. And until you realise that you're probably working at 60, 70% and thinking that smashing out all this stuff that's irrelevant just so you can feel like you've, turned over every stone, you're going to find yourself in trouble and not working as well as you can as a coach, I think.
Can happen to the best. We saw it during the Olympics, the previous Olympics, where the head coach of the Dutch national women's squad during the finals was preparing for another quarter of hockey. And the players were sort of paralyzed looking at her and saying, sorry, we have shootouts. So you should mention now who's going to take a shootout. So even at that level, it can happen. And it just stresses out how important it is to look after yourself too as a coach. I mean, I learned that I just like to have a chit chat with people. And you know, I have to let my players know that I need that. You know, there's not me being casual. It's just me you know, getting rid of some tension. And then I'll grab the 5-10 minutes prior to a game to be really on my own and get my focus. I mean, that's just me. Is that wrong or right? Well, it's right for me. It might be wrong to someone else. Just make sure that your players know it.
Yeah. I'm sure we've all got some carnage stories around that, forgetting where we are, what's going on. I remember in a meeting with the West Australian under-21 boys, we were watching some sports code and we were looking at some pressing things. And I was at about the third clip in this meeting room, and I was really tired, really lots of stuff going on in my life at the time, just exhausted. And the boy started smirking, and I'm like, what's going on here? Am I not speaking well? I feel like and what had happened was I didn't see it on the sports code files, but I'd shown the same clip 3 times in a row and talked through the details of how we needed to, transition from our zonal starting structure into this pocket press. And I had no idea because I was so exhausted that I wasn't really attuned to what's happening at the time. So it's pretty easy. And anyone that feels that they can fight fatigue, which we probably all do at some point in our lives, is delusional because it gets to you. Short-term memory loss, lack of focus, poor decision-making. It just gets ratty, right?
Yep.
One thing I suppose that some of those examples will resonate a lot with our community coaches around the place. I know that sometimes in my own coaching practice, I get a little bit wound up in terms of buying into the team result or the outcomes that we're looking for. And, you know, you work really hard, you know, you've felt like you've put in a lot of effort as a coach. And then at the end of the day, you've got to trust your players to kind of execute that. And I think that's one of the arts of coaching. And as you guys have just kind of alluded to, if you can find a way that you're going to be portrayed as very relaxed and you've looked after yourself, and, you know, that's going to be what's best for the team, I suppose. So I'm sure a lot of community coaches out there will know what that feels like. And that little piece of advice about looking after yourself is probably going to fall in the right place for them. Just going backwards a little bit. So we talked a little bit about giving feedback and that communication piece. I suppose, you know, having that really effective communication in that pre-match or in the lead up to a game is important. How, as a coach, obviously, Jason, you alluded to doing some surveys and stuff, but how, as a coach, can you know that you're actually getting through to your players? So what things can you do to ensure that's happening and that you're actually not just assuming that it's happening?
Yeah, well, obviously in game day, you're observing whether, you know, the mechanics of how you're trying to play are being put in place. And if you're watching for certain scenarios and situations, you can see how the group acts to that. So the observation piece is obviously a key one. And I think the art of asking questions, maybe an athlete's a bit slow on one of those mechanics, or they seem a little bit lost. So you can talk to them through that. I think for me, it's not necessarily how you do it. It's just having front of mind that you've got to keep stress testing that you're actually getting the message across, and everybody's interpretation and buy-in and understanding of that is progressing to an optimal place. So I think I think you've got to always attack things at different angles because people learn and see things differently. But you just got to keep stress testing it, not just assume that, well, I'm talking and we trained this way and I sent them a glossy document, that you're actually getting anywhere with what you're doing.
That's why video is actually so important, because you know, you can win a game and maybe you know, you're really happy because you won the game, but then you've been working on some learnings for the past few weeks and none of those learnings are being transferred to that game. Are you happy as a coach? No, because there's no growth. Yeah, maybe you're temporarily happy because you just had your 3 points or whatever, but actually reflect on what you have been training, discussing by using your video game is actually, or clips from your game is actually very important to me.
Yeah, the measurement piece is quite interesting, isn't it? You know, sometimes we think we're doing a good job because we win games, when in actual fact it's just because you've got the better players. And it's more about, you know, what are we trying to do? How are we trying to play? What are the things we're working on or trying to develop, and finding ways to measure that instead of, you know, we scored this many corner goals and we're winning games of hockey. Sometimes those things can distract us from the truth, or get to things that are actually valuable in terms of what we're working on.
Yeah, I find stats always a difficult one. When I see data, statistics, you know, I mean, they're interesting in a way, but in a way they're not, because well, this is something that Jamie would know. I mean, we decided, for example, to play with a team with a very low free man. And actually, we just wanted to have an overload of people constantly in the circle instead of outside the circle, because in the end, the ball always goes into the circle. It's the vision. You can agree or disagree. But then when you see the stats, we had a lot of circle, penetrations against our team. Yeah, obviously we had that. But then the efficiency of our opponents in the circle was really low, but it's really hard to get statistics on that. So statistics are interesting in a way, but if you don't know the why behind things, you're gonna, well, interpret it in the wrong way, I would say.
Yeah, I love that, mate. I totally agree. You know, I think the other thing is there's that whole Mcnamara Fallacy, which basically says that what you measure becomes sort of who you are. So if we're saying we want this many of this, then that's what people focus on, and that sort of drives what you're trying to do as a group. It's a bit like the NAPLAN testing they do in Australia, where kids they get measured on where they're at, and the school gets measured at where they're at on these tests that they do every year. And it's the way the government measure, I guess, the academic progress of the country. The problem is the whole year is spent getting ready for the test, and people forgot that we're supposed to be learning and educating these kids for their future lives, you know. So measurement can be a bit of a danger with that, because it's so hard to measure hockey. There's so much complexity, so much that's not really understood. So I'm with you, not big on measuring things and going, yep, we've got it.
If you really want to measure, I would say you measure where you lose the ball, where you gain the ball, or who loses the ball and who gains the ball. I mean, that probably tells you most. But yeah, if you go deeper, it looks really fancy. But yeah, is it really going to change the next game for you? I mean, I have doubts.
Well, one of my favorites is the whole possession thing. And I won't tell you which country I was at or where I'm at, but there's been in my journey as a coach this strong thing around measuring possession. And it's like, we lost today 1-0, but we had 60% possession of the game. And I always in those meetings and forums go, well, what does that mean? Why are we even measuring that? And it's an interesting one that we sort of locked in on as a hockey community around the world. It's like you need possession because that means you're controlling the game and you're playing well. But there's so many different ways to skin a cat. Maybe you're better off flooding in the back third and counterattacking with the sort of personnel that you have. And maybe you're not good with possession, so you don't want the ball. You're better at defending, and you try and find field position where you can actually get some outcomes from the few chances that you create. So there's all these different things, and possession is a really nice one for me, because it's one of those areas where people just regurgitate that we want to have more possession, and look, we've got 60% more possession, so we're playing well and we're progressing. And I'm like, not sure what any of that means.
Yeah, Dutch people would argue with you, because we like to have the ball. If we don't have the ball, the game is pretty boring. So actually, it sort of here the statistic would connect to the values that we have, and then it becomes important. So Germans are probably the opposite. You know, they just don't want the ball, and just make it very difficult for you to get to the circle. So there it becomes interesting that, again, different cultures could also have different needs. But yeah,
that's quite cool.
Interesting discussion.
I did start my early career decades ago sort of saying that I am a German, that we've got a point each before the game and you're not having ours. And if you want to try and take ours and expose yourself, we'll take yours as well. Yeah. I've probably chopped and changed from that mantra throughout my career, but it's interesting how the cultures that you grow up in, how they sort of direct your focus and how you see things.
Yeah, because I mean, there's actually a very nice example in this. So, I mean, based upon statistics, actually, you don't want to have the ball. I mean, most goals are scored from turnover situations. At least at a high performance level. I'm not sure at community level, could be the same. But then, Dutch national head coach wanted to, adopt a different playing style because of these facts. It was just not accepted by the players. It took 2 years, but no, we're not going to do this. It's just not culturally ingrained. We're not going to do it. We want the ball. So that's important.
It's not who we are. Yeah, and that's like the Klopp and the gen pressing or the counter pressing, where the opportunity of when you turn the ball over in your front third is actually the best opportunity in the game if you can get it back straight away, because on that double turnover, on that transition, that the opposition aren't going to be organised and they'll be thinking about going forward. And if you can get them straight away, that you're going to have a cleaner opportunity without numbers behind the ball. So possession and where you get it back, there's probably a layer under just possession that you can look at, which will give you a bit more direction, I suppose.
That's really interesting stuff, going into some of that measurement information. I'm going to kind of take it a little bit simpler now. I'd kind of like to know how you guys adjust your game day preparations for a high performance team versus, say, a secondary team. So a lot of the listeners will be coaching high school teams, and how does that change for you guys in your experience that you've had so far?
For me, it's not I like to stress that out directly. For me, it's not a matter of level. It's maybe a matter of age. So, you might adopt your strategy as a coach because you're dealing with a different age category. But I'm sure that each level you coach, players just want to win, and they want to feel good about the game before they're going to play the game. And that's your duty as a coach to make sure they do so. So I wouldn't change a lot, actually, regardless the level I'm coaching, and I've coached on different levels. It's just what you can demand from them. Maybe, the lower level, you're not going to have endless video analysis and discussions with your players, whereas at the performance level, that might, be more the status quo. So just take them serious, your players, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I like that, Mark. I would repeat that, Jamie. I think it's I don't think the approach changes too much. It's just the consistency of what you do, and what you think is important, but just what level of knowledge and experience they have, and just adjusting slightly to tailor that. Keeping it simple is always important, regardless of what you're doing. And Mark spoke about bringing new things in just before the game and the catastrophe that creates. So we've all lived that. I think one of the things that I want to maybe segue into from this, mate, is like how our coaches carry themselves during the game. Because when you were sort of asking that question, I sort of thought we talked around getting ready for the game and so forth, but the most visible thing is what we actually do during the game. And when you talk about junior coaching, whether it's school coaching or or even just community coaching, I think we underestimate the impact that our behaviour has on game day as a coach, as in actually while the game's being played. And I think we overestimate the impact in terms of what we have with, coaching, instruction and so forth. So the behaviour piece is a really important conversation for me around how we're carrying ourselves and how we behave on side of the pitch during the game, and the impact that has on our players.
Fantastic. I think it's a really nice segue into the actual game. So we've talked about pre-game, and now we're going to kind of move into the actual game. What are some of the things that you like to action when you're on the sideline in terms of the interactions with the players? What things are good do's, and some of the things that you think are probably steer clear of?
Well, we have the terminology joystick coach. I'm not sure if you know that, but so don't coach them on the ball. That means in proper wordings. Let them make their own decisions. let them be creative, and we can always reflect and discuss afterwards about, decisions that they made. I do like to encourage certain players. I mean, some players really benefit from that when you're just cheering them up, being positive. But over the years, I've actually learned that the more you say, the worse it is. So if you want to say something, let it be subtle, let it be individual, and let it be energy focused. So for me, that's probably the most important one, energy focused. So if your team is under stress, you can recognize that, they just lose more often the ball. They become more verbal. It's that they're defending a 1-0 win in the game, and there's still 5 minutes to go. If you start to be very active, then it's for me a minus, plus, and minus, and it's not becoming a plus. It's they're under stress, you're under stress, and it just goes down the drain. So I like to use the word yin yang here. I mean, if the team is showing white, be a little bit black. If the team is showing black, be a little bit white. So if they're becoming casual, you can you can be a bit more on top of them. If they're under stress, maybe just make a joke. So for me, that's very important during a game. And another thing I'd like to share is, by coincidence, I happened to video one of my games with the camera on top of the dugout because the video tower was not accessible. And it was interesting that players after that game commented to me, and they told me that they thought I was too negative. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I actually taped this game, so I'm gonna, listen it back. And I was not watching any of the hockey. I was just, all right, negative, positive, negative, positive. And I figured out I had around 50, 60 positive cues or comments to my players during that game. And I also figured out I had 16 more, well, not negative, but like, hey, come on, you can do better there, which is perceived as a negative thing. So then I asked a few of my players, all right, well, thanks for sharing, but let me know, how many negative things you heard, over the whole game. And they came up with something like 40. And then I said, how many positive things that you think I was saying? And it came up with something like 10. So, and I showed them the facts. And the biggest learning for me was that people, or athletes at least, tend to remember the negative things more than the positive things. So you have to be really cautious with what you're saying in a game, because, especially when they perceive it as negative, it will stick more into their minds and they're not going to play better. Having said that, I also said, the yin-yang approach, sometimes they need that encouragement as well. But I think it's important to share.
Yeah, I really like the reference around not joystick coaching. I think it's one of the blights on coaching in our community. So detrimental to people's development, where they can't just learn and build that experience with how they problem solve and approach the game. So I think that's really important. I really also like what you talked about with the centering the group around the coach, sort of pushing them back the other way and being really aware of where the group's at. And that to me sort of leads into the fact, I think the biggest learning for me as a coach is to not be emotionally attached to the game. And I know it's really hard because coaches are passionate and they're part of the team and they want, they care about being successful and all those things. So it's emotional. But anytime you're emotionally connected to the game and you're riding moment by moment, bump by bump, you just can't have the broad bandwidth that you need to be composed and balanced and looking at and then making the right decisions about what you do with your time. And as we know, the adrenaline and the emotion of when things go badly, it leads to umpire abuse and screaming and all sorts of stuff, which is not healthy or that savoury in terms of how we want the game to look. So I always talk to developing coaches around, for me, game day coaching is like play acting, which is a bit of your yin and yang stuff, mate, where I'm watching the group and I'm being whatever they need me to be. That might be quiet for the whole game. That might be me eating sushi or fruit salad like I'd like to do some games. Other games, it might be I need to be a bit more demanding and I might need to have a voice because we've been flat during the week or for whatever reason. So I don't go into games anymore emotionally like we need to win today and I'm part of that. I'm not part of that at all for me. I'm actually play acting my way through being whatever the group needs at any given time, which is totally separate from an emotional connection to being part of that with the team. Of course, I'm part of it. But for me to be composed and to be really switched on about where I need to attend my focus, that for me is the only way you can do it. I think as soon as you get emotionally connected, you're just taken to places which don't allow you to see or to carry yourself in the way that's required.
An Argentinian coach or team might argue here, or a Spanish one.
No doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an amazing point, Butch. I mean, again, just referring back to my own coaching experience, I've been there. I've been that emotional coach that rides every moment. And I suppose the longer you do something, the more that becomes apparent. So, in terms of your own development and getting to that, what were some of the things that happened to you that made you really realize that was the case?
You're opening up Pandora's box, my own Pandora's box on this one, mate. Look, I got brought up without a long history in a family that had a coach as a father. And even when I was a kid, so I was sort of being developed to be a coach my whole life. And part of that early development was in Australian Football League. So that's what he was really prominent as. And the culture there is probably like rugby and even hockey, local hockey, where coaching then was fire and brimstone, passionate speeches, yelling, get in the trenches, dig in, you're being weak, all that sort of stuff. And I became quite good at that as an early coach and had a lot of success really early. But as you start to progress and you look at your real impact on it and your real influence, and not just short term, but also long term with that approach, so it doesn't become white noise and it's healthy and so forth, you start to see that journey is not really the way that you should be coaching. And I in early days would smash whiteboards, break walkie-talkies, feeling like that I have to be the leader in front, just going, come on. And it's not healthy. It's not good to watch. And it's not a good approach for our coaches to have in terms of how they lead sport. Not just because it doesn't have the impact that they think it has, but it's just not a brand and a sustainable way of retaining people in the sport, and doesn't get results. So I've coached lots and lots, as you know, over decades. I think I've coached over 50 national championship level teams just below international. So I've coached a lot. And so I'm lucky to have success and failure in a couple of lifetimes all mashed together where I can reflect and grow with that. So I know when you say to coaches, look, you're not emotionally a part of this, step outside that framework and be composed, be rational and do your job. That's really hard because that's what they do and they love it. And I'm lucky because I've had a couple of lifetimes of failure and success where I've been able to reflect and grow and really get a really clear picture around what works and what my influence should be from a whole of sport and also for the team that I'm responsible for. It's hard.
This is also why I don't like, a setting where you have a team standing in a circle and the coach in the middle, because for me that symbolizes that the coach is at the center of things. You would never see me doing that. If the players force me, but I prefer to be in the circle myself. That's just something, to elaborate a little bit on what you were saying there, Jason.
Cool. I think just pulling something out of what you said there, Jason, the little gold nugget that I got out of that was just having a long-term perspective of what you're actually doing. So looking not just in the immediate result or reaction of your players, but thinking about long-term, that's going to kind of set you up to kind of succeed if you've always got that long-term kind of approach to it and looking, at the players and at the team, what's the long-term benefits going to be to me coaching in either style. So that's really good information. And I know that a lot of people will connect to that. So cheers for that one.
We become politicians, don't we, mate? We become politicians where we think we need to win this now to keep my job or to have status or to fill my ego. Politicians work on 3 or 4 year cycles to keep their job, and the long term gets lost. And I think whether it's player development, which Mark spoke about with the joystick coaching, we've got to let them grow and learn to make decisions and, perceive the environment and all the different things that go with holistic development. We've got to design things and behave so that we let them do that. But we also have got to behave in a way that we're not putting people off sport just to win on Saturday. So you can still be successful with a balanced, more long-term approach of letting people grow and letting them love and enjoy what they're doing on a weekly basis, I reckon.
You're so right, but at the same time, it resonates with me. But there's a big but, because at strategic levels, decisions are still being made based upon results and ranking. And as long as the people up there only use those parameters to base their decisions upon, then you actually encourage coaches to coach in the wrong way. So also at that level, people have to be cautious about this, and not just the coaches themselves. Because for me, I went through that phase myself as well. I'm just a human. But there's more to it than just, hey, coach, just coach without your emotion and don't bother about the result. Just, bother about your players' development. It's difficult when the people above you are still making those decisions based upon your results.
Yeah, 100%, mate. And, we talk about constraints-based learning with our athletes. It's no different to us. If the constraints put in place by the governing bodies and the associations and just the cultural pressure around, well, this coach won NHL or did this, then they're going to be in a position to get a job or keep their job, then we just naturally behave in a way where we think we do everything in our powers to get that without responsibility for the future. I think, though, and it's a bigger conversation than just today, I really believe with the right experience and knowledge and support that you can do both at the same time. Yeah. I think we behave not great and do short-termism things because they seem easy and clear, but you can still have your cake and eat it, I reckon.
Although you could cross your own values as a coach to win, it's easy to use fear to actually win. It's still a strategy being used by coaches at high performance levels at different sports across the world. For me, that's my own values are always the standard. Like, if I cross my own values, then I'm not doing right and justice to myself and to my players. If I stick to my values, most things are allowed.
Yeah, and fear and demand, they work short term. We all know that. Like, I've done that before. We can do that. But we all know that the opposite side of that, love and support and care, is much more powerful. And it's just figuring out how you use that to empower teams when you're in that Olympic final or your Premier League game that matters, where those values are used for teams to get the job done together versus the fear and the intensity of our coaching. So I'm not saying don't be demanding. I'm not saying don't be intense. I still like winning. What I'm saying is there's a deeper thing that we can unpack here and do this in a better way for everybody's love and enjoyment of the game, but also long-term retention of people wanting to play because they love the environments they're in.
It's really good advice. I suppose from a Sport New Zealand perspective, we've all kind of seen some of the numbers that are coming out in terms of dropout in sport. So, holding those kind of supportive characteristics in your coaching and trying to promote longevity in the game and things is something that we all need to start incorporating into our own coaching practice, because at the end of the day, we want to have our kids playing sport because of all the great things that they learn from sport. So it's a really nice touch there too. Just going back to game day stuff, I just kind of talking about the winning and losing and kind of your behavior and things like that, like we just have. Does the approach change at all in a final or in a promotion relegation match? I just find that quite interesting because I know from my own experience as a player and as a coach, a final can be such an exciting thing for the players. And on the other side of that, relegation can be such a daunting kind of prospect. So is any kind of little tools that you've used to kind of keep the team centered and kind of focused on the job?
Very curious to hear if we differ here, but to me, every game is a game I want to win, and I assume that my players want to win the game as well. And I don't think that differs at performance or community levels. And I don't think you should make any game more important than any other game. And actually, if you do as a coach, I think that's quite ignorant, because if it's an important game, like a relegation or a promotion game or a championship game, then I assume that my players would know that it's important. So if I'm going to stress out that it's important, actually I'm telling them indirectly that they're not committed, which is strange, because they should know. And then
don't trust them.
Yeah, I don't trust them. So I think it's a wrong signal. And what I do as well is maybe they feel stress about that in their bodies. So if I'm going to stress out that it's even more important than they already think it is, it's just stress on stress on stress. So probably when that game starts, they're completely frozen statues. So again, for me, it's just breathing what the group needs at a certain game. Doesn't matter if it's a championship game, a relegation, a promotion game. To me, they're all important and I all want to win them. And just, what they need at that specific day or in that specific week in the build up towards that game, that's what you're going to do as a coach. But one thing I'm not going to do is to make it more important than it is. No.
Yeah, I couldn't have explained that better, mate. I agree with that 100%. And I think, we probably all made the mistakes. You see coaches who will be in a grand final and they'll get guest speakers during the week, or have another coach on the bench, and, all these different things that add, we talked about the yin and yang and the staying centered and different things throughout games. It's no different for big games. You'll know your group, and if they're not switched on, maybe you can do something during the week just to make sure that we're, sharp. But really, generally, if they know it's big and they're already in that space, they're going to be stressed out anyway. So adding new things to create confusion or stress or so forth just doesn't make any sense to me. So you just do the same things that you've always done. And you hopefully have a program where you can trust your players that they get how big it is, and you try and make it as easy and as simple and as normal as possible for them to have a crack at performing really well.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, there's definitely those are little traps, I suppose, for new coaches that don't really understand how to cope with the big occasion. And I suppose that's really good advice, is just to kind of keep it really simple. Less is more in those big situations, because it's just more noise for the coach and the players to have to deal with. So yeah, as you say, they're already dealing with enough with the perceived pressure, which is kind of could hinder their performance on the day. So keeping it simple is probably really good advice.
Although there is value in reflecting afterwards, because in a way those games are more important. They do tend to create more stress with both players and coaches. So if you lose an important game, it's interesting to really reflect on what happened during the build-up and during the game or game preparation, because there is definitely learning in that. And if you won that game, do the same, because there's definitely learning in that, and just repeat what went well. So it's not just another game, but the value is really in the result, reflecting on the result afterwards for me.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I've learned the hard way is you've got to watch your group as well. And it can't just be as simple as, well, we'll just keep doing the same thing and we'll keep it sort of centered and we'll be okay. Because sometimes the players don't actually keep that same philosophy of keeping it the same. One of the examples I'll give was, again, the AHL and with the Thunderstick Australian Hockey League. We played in a grand final in 2016. And the year before that, when we played in Darwin, we weren't the favourites and we lost the grand final to Queensland. This year, we were the favourites in the grand final. And we seemed in a pretty good space. We were playing good hockey. I was pretty confident going in the game. And I think we lost 5-3 or something, started not great and just played catch up all day. The boys were brave. They played okay, but it was a real missed opportunity. And then when I unpacked that day, we had to get out of our accommodation, and the boys had organised to have some beers and some other fun activities after the game in the change rooms. It was actually in Perth, which I should have said, so our home stadium, home venue. And we had the physio running around buying grog, and all these things were happening. And, it wasn't that they were deliberately not focused. We had good meetings, good processes, but there was just this slight distraction where they were thinking about just, getting out of the hotel, planning how they're going to get from the stadium, all these little sort of side distractions in that 12, 24-hour period. And you have to question whether just by keeping it the same and not catching that, or getting more effort into them being really aware of the distractions they can create for themselves, that maybe that was a key part of the outcome.
Yeah, that's interesting. Those little things that you'd kind of sometimes really difficult to capture in the moment can be picked up in the aftermath. So I think reflection is a great message there. So just moving from that into our post-match now. So the post-match review. Is there any point to doing it straight away after the game, or is there some things that you've learnt over the years that you can and can't incorporate into that post-match review?
Some things you have to do. If you made a mistake to an umpire or to the opponent, I think you have to reflect on that directly so you can make your apologies directly. But really analyzing the game, because there could be emotion attached to it. So wait till you've seen some video clips. I also think it's important to hear the perspective of the coach of the opponent after a game. For me, that was quite common to do in the Netherlands. I've noticed that it's not that common in New Zealand, so maybe there's something to gain in that area. But yeah.
It's an interesting one. I'm sort of at the place where I don't think people are in a headspace to do anything of any real detail straight after a game. So whether it's after they do their own recovery or it's just before, I sort of chop and change. But I feel like I need to wrap it for them. Like, okay, we move to the next thing. So it might be 10 seconds. Like, great job, made good progress with this. Let's work through it next week, whatever. So I think you got to close it. But I'm really reluctant to go into detail about anything or have that period straight after a game as part of the real review process, if you like. I just don't think it works.
Yeah, you have to close it. I agree. You have to have some sort of closure, but not too detailed. No.
Excellent. All right, that's pretty much wrapped up all the facets of a game day process. So that's really cool. Just in closing, it'd be cool to get some stories or some old war stories of a day that you got it really right or a day that you got it really wrong. So if you could delve into your memory banks and pull something out for us, that'd be quite cool.
I don't like to. I'm never wrong. That's what I always tell my wife. So yeah, I'm not sure if I can deviate from that strategy right now. No. Of course you get it wrong. But to me, it's not just one answer. It's wrong to a certain player in a specific moment. It's very situational. So, maybe you have been too much on top of a certain player, or you have been too negative or too emotional in a way towards a certain player. And yeah, there were examples in the past where I did that, and actually I won't exclude that it cannot happen in the future. I mean, yeah, it can always happen. You don't hope it happens, but it's easy to say the wrong thing to a certain player, and it's also you as a coach learning what motivates a player and what doesn't, and it's also learning about how to work together. And sometimes are those moments bad, because after a good fight, if you know how to solve that, or how to solve the conflict, you actually grow towards each other, like in any relationship. So sometimes you actually need that wrong coaching to have a open, fair, and honest discussion afterwards with a player and actually grow a relation. So yeah, I've been wrong in my coaching, but is that wrong in the end? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think progression is just a series of minor failures accumulated that you step on top of to go forward. You know, you like to get it as right as you can, but every day, every week, it's never perfect, every interaction. So it's the ability to sort of be able to reflect and understand that and keep moving forward with it, I suppose. I don't think there's such thing as not failing, especially in the complex nature of the role of a coach. You know, so one of the things we need to come to grips with is that we're going to fail every day probably, and also to embrace it. You know, if you're not trying things and not exploring and experimenting with things, then you're not going anywhere, you know. So if you approach things in that way and you're curious about finding better ways, you're going to fail all the time, aren't you? It's God-given.
We also want our players to fail and to make mistakes. So we can do that. The biggest mistake you can actually make is not to be vulnerable, I would say. I mean, just be honest and open. If you made a mistake as a coach, don't start to defend yourself. If you made a mistake, admit it. Maybe make a joke about it, and talk about it. But yeah, I mean, don't pretend you're a king.
Jokes are good. We need to lighten the mood often, I think, with the stuff that we're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, very nice. All right, gents, thank you so much for your time. Game day process is obviously something we could continue to talk about, and it's intriguing to hear some of your insights into the pre-match, during the match and post-match. You've hit some really nice points. Just in closing, I'll just kind of sum those up. So having some flexibility in your lead-in, making sure that you're not adding too much to the players on game day is probably some really good advice. Because it's just probably going to go straight over the top of their head. Keeping going with that, just while you're on the side of the field, is try not to be a joystick coach. Letting the players have the freedom to be creative, to make their own decisions and their own mistakes, and being there to support them through that. The yin and yang style of coaching was a really cool little nugget that our coaches can take away. Is sometimes you've got to be a little bit forceful, and other times you've got to pull it back depending on how you read the team. And then also, Butch, some of the ideas you had around trying to take yourself out of the emotional situation and just being really there as a play actor is really cool advice as well, because I know a lot of our coaches will want to get stuck in and be a part of it, but are they actually giving the service that they should to the team? Probably not. So really nice point there. And then, yeah, just having a long-term perspective on your coaching and looking for the long-term outcomes for our players and our teams, even though sometimes we may have pressures from outside forces, as you alluded to, Mark. We can still hold true to our values and coach the way that we want to coach. So that's awesome, guys. Thank you so much for your time again. I'm looking forward to catching up with you on the next podcast. No doubt we'll have something funky to talk about, and I'll be able to get some more gems out of your great hockey mind. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Butch.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Jamie. Brilliant.
Excellent. We'll catch you next time.
See you guys.
Thanks a lot for listening. We hope you enjoyed the Hockey New Zealand Exploring Coaching podcast. We encourage you to take the time and identify a couple of things that resonated with you that you can apply to your own coaching practice. We look forward to having you on board for our next podcast too, so keep an eye on the Hockey New Zealand website for more information.